The arrest, the metal clicked so hard around her wrist that for a moment, General Angela Price thought the sound came from inside her bones. Cold steel bit into her skin, rain ran down her face like sweat, and the red-blue strobe from the cruiser lights painted her uniform in the same colors that flew above every base she'd ever served. Only tonight. Those colors stood for humiliation. Hands where I can see them. Now, one of the officers barked again, though she'd already complied. Fingers spread, palms open. The man's voice carried that jittery adrenaline that came when fear met power, a sound she'd heard from young soldiers before their first firefight. But this wasn't a war zone. This was a quiet street in Fairfax County, Virginia, 15 miles from the Pentagon, and she had just come back from a humanitarian mission that saved 300 lives overseas. She was wearing civilian clothes, no makeup, hair tied neatly back, driving her black government sedan home from the base. Her only crime tonight was being a tired black woman in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Sir," she said evenly, her voice as calm as if she were addressing a briefing room. "You're making a mistake. I'm Major General Angela Price. My identification is inside my wallet in the front compartment of my bag. I'm going to reach for it slowly. Ma'am, do not move." The taller officer, Sergeant Harlan, she caught from the badge, stepped closer, hand on his holster. "You fit the description of a suspect. Step away from the vehicle." "Description?" she asked softly, incredulous. "Of what, driving while existing?" The younger officer flinched at that but didn't intervene. His face looked too fresh for this kind of ugliness. Probably his first year on patrol. Angela's breath clouded in the cold air as she slowly turned around, the rain now running through her short-cropped hair. "I'm giving you a lawful order," Harlan said. "Hands on the hood," she complied. Years of discipline did not dissolve in one night. She laid her palms on the cool metal of her car, felt the hum of the engine still faintly alive. She thought of her mother, a nurse during the civil rights marches, and how she used to whisper, "Keep your dignity even when they take everything else." When the cuffs came down, scraping her skin, something in her chest burned hotter than anger. It was the kind of pain that lived deeper. The betrayal of knowing that after all the medals, after decades of service, she could still be reduced to a suspect. "Ma'am, what were you doing in this neighborhood tonight?" the younger cop asked uncertainly. His tone was softer, almost apologetic. "Returning home from defending the country you're supposed to serve," she said. "Now would you please check your system before you embarrass yourself any further?" But Harlan wasn't listening. He was enjoying his moment, puffed up with authority. "We'll sort that out downtown," he muttered, guiding her roughly toward the cruiser. She didn't resist. She simply looked at him. That long, steady gaze soldiers used when assessing an enemy they'd already beaten in their mind. The rain intensified, heavy drops clattering against the windshield as she sat in the back seat, hands cuffed, the air thick with the smell of wet leather and arrogance. Harlan's voice came through the open driver's window, low but sharp. "Claiming to be some kind of general. I've heard that before. Probably some stolen valor crap." Angela's lips curved slightly, almost into a smile, but it wasn't amusement. It was disbelief sharpened by sorrow. "You really don't know what you've done," she said quietly. "What was that?" he snapped. She lifted her head, eyes steady on the rearview mirror where their reflections met. "I said," she repeated, voice measured and deadly calm, "you've made a very big mistake." For a brief moment, no one spoke. The sound of thunder rolled through the night like distant artillery, and the cruiser began to pull away from the curb. The flashing lights reflected off the puddles like silent alarms to the universe. Inside her chest, Angela's heartbeat was steady, trained. Years of leading troops under enemy fire had carved into her a patience most people could never imagine. But tonight something different stirred beneath that composure, a rising tide she couldn't suppress. Not fury, not fear, something older and deeper. Justice awakening. She stared through the rain-slicked window as her car disappeared behind her, her government-issued ID still inside the briefcase on the front seat. The Pentagon insignia gleamed faintly under the passing light, and she knew, once someone opened that bag, the storm truly would begin. As they drove into the night, she thought of the lives she'd saved, the soldiers she'd buried, and the flag she'd saluted every morning without fail. And she wondered, how could a nation demand loyalty from people it refused to see? Lightning flashed across the windshield. The young officer looked back once, his eyes uncertain, guilty. For a heartbeat she saw hesitation, maybe even humanity so flicker there. Then he turned away, and the cruiser doors locked with a heavy mechanical click. General Angela Price closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Let them have their moment. They have no idea who they've just handcuffed." Outside, the storm gathered its strength, and somewhere deep in Washington, the night was about to wake up. The interrogation, the cell smelled like bleach and old fear. The walls were pale gray, the kind of color meant to erase people, to turn them into shadows with numbers instead of names. General Angela Price sat on a metal bench, cuffs still biting her wrists, wet clothes clinging to her skin. Her mind was a battlefield of silence. Not panic, not rage, but an icy calculation only a seasoned commander could master. Outside the bars, the two officers whispered near a coffee machine. Their words were muffled, but tone revealed everything. Disbelief, mockery, a touch of fear. She caught fragments. Claims she's a general. Pentagon, my ass. Maybe she's one of those YouTube crazies. The laughter that followed was short and brittle. Like glass breaking under pressure, Angela leaned back, eyes half closed, feeling the hum of the fluorescent light above. It buzzed with the same dull persistence as their arrogance. She thought of the day she received her first star, her late husband's trembling hands pinning it to her shoulder. He'd died a year later from cancer linked to burn pits overseas. The military had given her everything and taken everything too, but it had never humiliated her. Not like this. A door opened and Sergeant Harlan strutted in, his expression smug and performative. "Well, General," he said, dragging out the word with deliberate sarcasm. "Seems like your Pentagon forgot to answer the phone tonight." "I asked for one call," she said calmly. "And I told you procedure first," he interrupted. "We'll verify who you are once we process your prints. Unless, of course, they come back with something else." Angela tilted her head slightly. "Something else? You tell me. You're the one carrying a government vehicle registration and a defense ID you claim belongs to you. Could be stolen. Could be forged." She studied him, not his words, but his insecurity. Men like Harlan didn't crave justice. They craved dominance, the illusion of being the biggest man in the room. She'd seen his type commanding frightened recruits, bullying weaker subordinates to hide their own fear. "You don't really believe that," she said softly. "You just don't know how to admit you were wrong." Harlan's jaw tightened. "Watch your tone. Or what?" she asked, voice like a drawn blade. "You'll arrest me again?" For a moment, silence flooded the room. Even the buzzing light seemed to pause. Then Harlan turned sharply and walked out, slamming the metal door behind him. The echo rolled through the station like thunder. Not power, just noise. Through the narrow glass window, Angela could see the younger officer at his desk. "Officer Mills," his name tag said. He was staring at her arrest form, lips moving slightly as he read it again and again. She could see doubt fighting with duty in his eyes. Finally, he rose and walked toward her cell, voice quiet, almost uncertain. "Ma'am, may I ask, are you really—" "Yes," she said, cutting him off, not unkindly. "I am. 2 stars, U.S. Army. Look in the right database and you'll see." He swallowed. "They said your ID was fake." "They said a lot of things," she replied. "But tell me something, Officer Mills, what made you stop believing them just now?" He hesitated. "The car registration. It's listed under the Department of Defense Fleet. That's not something people fake easily." Angela leaned forward slightly. "Then make the call. The Pentagon switchboard. Ask for duty command. Give them my name, General Angela Marie Price." Mills looked around nervously. "Sergeant Harlan said not to—" "Sergeant Harlan," she interrupted, "will not be the one whose name appears in the after-action report when this goes public. You will. Decide which side of history you want to stand on, officer." The words struck him like an order from a superior he instinctively wanted to obey. He stepped back, conflicted, eyes darting toward the hallway. Moments later, the door opened again. Harlan returned with another man. Older, heavier, with silver hair and a badge that read Chief Reynolds. His eyes were tired, wary of lawsuits more than truth. "What's this about calling the Pentagon?" Reynolds asked gruffly. "She insisted," Harlan said quickly. "Keeps claiming she's a 2-star general. We ran her license. It was flagged restricted. Could be some government spooky thing." Reynolds frowned, glancing through the bars. You got any idea what kind of trouble we're in if she's telling the truth? Angela didn't move. You already are. That silenced them both. Reynolds stepped closer, studying her face under the harsh light. There was something in her eyes that didn't match any criminal he'd ever seen. That cold steadiness, that absence of fear. He had been a cop long enough to know when someone was bluffing. She wasn't. Release her cuffs, Reynolds ordered quietly. Harlan blinked. What? I said release her. The sergeant hesitated, but one look from his superior made him obey. As the cuffs fell away, Angela rubbed her wrist slowly, not in relief but in quiet defiance. Reynolds sighed, rubbing his temples. Ma'am, we'll sort this out, but please understand. What I understand, she said, standing tall, is that the United States Army will be contacting you soon. And when they do, you won't be explaining it to me. She turned to Mills, who stood frozen near the desk, still holding his phone. Their eyes met briefly. Gratitude and warning mixed in that glance. Harlan muttered under his breath. She's bluffing, but as if fate wanted to answer him. The phone on the chief's desk began to ring, a shrill, urgent tone that cut through the silence like a command. Reynolds frowned, picked it up. Fairfax County Police Chief Reynolds speaking. A pause. His expression changed. Confusion, then disbelief, then fear. Yes, sir. Understood. She's here. His hand trembled slightly as he turned to look at her. Angela folded her hands calmly. That'll be the Pentagon, she said softly. Told you they'd answer. The young officer's mouth fell open. Harlan stepped back, color draining from his face, and for the first time that night Angela smiled. Not in triumph, but in knowing. The balance of power had just shifted and the storm outside had only begun to stir. The awakening. The ringing phone still echoed in the cramped room long after the chief hung up. Everyone stood frozen. Rain hammered against the small station windows, thunder rolling through the distance like the slow drumbeat of judgment approaching. General Angela Price didn't speak. She didn't have to. The silence had already shifted. Chief Reynolds cleared his throat, voice lower now, cautious. General. The Pentagon confirmed your identity. Her reply was measured, steady as the hum of a jet engine. Of course they did. Reynolds swallowed, sweat beginning to bead at his temple. They also said someone from Defense Command is on their way here. They sounded urgent. Angela leaned slightly forward, eyes unwavering. You mean they sounded furious? The younger officer, Mills, stared at her like someone who had just realized he was standing next to a live wire. Harlan, on the other hand, was pacing near the wall, his arrogance collapsing under the weight of what he couldn't control. This is insane, he muttered. She can't just... Enough! The word from the chief cracked like a whip. You've done enough damage tonight. Angela watched them with an eerie calm, her expression unreadable. Inside, a swirl of emotions fought for dominance. Vindication, exhaustion, and something else, darker and older, that she hadn't felt since combat. Betrayal. Not by enemies abroad, but by her own soil. They escorted her to the small interview room. A single camera blinked red in the corner. A half-empty cup of stale coffee sat on the table. The kind of detail that said this room had heard too many lies. But tonight the truth was the intruder. Reynolds tried for diplomacy. General, if there's any explanation... There isn't, she said. You allowed your officers to detain a ranking U.S. Army officer without cause, without due process, and with racial bias as the only justification. That's not a mistake, Chief, that's a symptom. He opened his mouth to respond, but the sharp screech of tires outside interrupted him. Headlights flared through the frosted glass, cutting through the storm. Moments later, the door burst open. Two men in dark suits entered, soaked but composed. Behind them, a woman in a crisp uniform stepped in. Colonel Rachel Monroe, Pentagon Internal Affairs. She was 10 years younger than Angela, but carried herself with the same steel-backed authority. Her eyes flicked around the room, landing on Angela first. Ma'am, Monroe said, voice steady. Are you all right? Angela nodded once. Physically, yes. But you'll need to review their footage. Every second of it. We already have, Monroe replied, glancing toward the camera. Your arrest was live-streamed from one of their dash cams to the Central Law Enforcement Database before it was manually shut off. The moment your name appeared on the scan, alerts triggered across 3 defense networks. The room went still. Even Harlan looked pale now, his mouth slightly open. Monroe turned to him. Sergeant Harlan, is it? You handcuffed a sitting 2-star general under false pretenses. denied her legal communication, and attempted to suppress identification evidence. You're aware that's a federal offense? Harlan stammered. I didn't know. That's the problem, Angela said quietly. You never cared to know. The colonel set a tablet on the table and played back the footage. The crackle of rain, the flashing lights, the words, "Step out of the car," the forced handcuffing. In the silence of the room, the sound of steel tightening around skin was louder than thunder. Mills shifted uneasily. I tried to call, ma'am, he said, eyes on Angela. I knew something was wrong. Angela gave him a small nod. You did the right thing. Don't forget that when they try to make you feel small for it. The chief exhaled slowly. Colonel, what happens now? Monroe's gaze hardened. This precinct is under federal review effective immediately. All involved parties are suspended pending investigation. You will cooperate fully or face obstruction charges. As she spoke, 2 military police officers entered, standing behind Harlan and Reynolds. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same posture, the same cuffs now turned toward the oppressors. But even as justice began to unfold, Angela's thoughts drifted inward, pulled toward something deeper. How many others, she wondered, never got the chance to make that call? Her mind flashed back to the faces of young soldiers she'd mentored. Black, Latino, Asian, white, all wearing the same uniform, all saluting the same flag, yet carrying different burdens under it. Monroe turned back to her. General, the Secretary of Defense wants to debrief you personally. They've requested your statement within the hour. Angela stood, her soaked clothes heavy but her posture unwavering. I'll give it to you. But before we leave, I want every one of these officers to hear something. Harlan scoffed. Here we go. Angela's voice cut through him like a command from a battlefield loudspeaker. You thought you were safe because you wore the badge. You thought your authority came from power. But power without accountability is just cowardice with paperwork. Tonight you learned that uniform doesn't make you a protector. Your character does. The words landed like a verdict. As Monroe guided her toward the exit, Angela paused by Mills. You've got potential, she told him quietly. Don't let this place destroy it. Yes, ma'am, he whispered, eyes wet but proud. Outside, military SUVs waited under the storm, headlights slicing through the downpour. Angela climbed in, closing the door on the stunned silence behind her. The vehicle pulled away, its tires hissing over the drenched road. Inside the car, Monroe handed her a secure phone. The Pentagon's patching you through, she said. Angela took it. But her reflection in the window caught her attention. Tired eyes, rain dripping down her temple, but a fierce glint still burning. As she pressed the phone to her ear, a calm male voice said, General Price, this is Defense Command. We've reviewed the live feed. Before we proceed, there's something you need to know. Angela's pulse slowed, her instincts sharpening. Go ahead. Your arrest wasn't random, the voice said quietly. We believe someone leaked your travel route to that precinct. This wasn't just racism, ma'am. It was a setup. The road blurred outside, raindrops streaking like silent tears across the glass. Angela sat back, eyes narrowing. Then find out who wanted me humiliated. And why? Monroe looked at her startled. You think this was intentional? Angela didn't answer. She just watched the dark horizon ahead, the city lights shimmering through the storm. Somewhere out there, betrayal was waiting, and she intended to meet it head-on. The reckoning. The Pentagon's light shimmered through the rain like a sleeping giant's eyes opening in the dark. The convoy rolled past security gates, through layers of guarded checkpoints, and into the heart of America's command nerve. Inside the SUV, General Angela Price sat in silence, her reflection in the glass steady and unreadable. The words still echoed in her mind. It wasn't random. Someone leaked your route. By the time she entered the briefing chamber, the room was already alive with tension. Screens glowed with classified reports. Military officials whispered in corners. And in the center of it all stood General Robert Keene, her former commanding officer, mentor once, rival now. His presence tightened the air. He looked older, heavier, but his eyes still held that smug flicker of control. Angela, he said, tone deceptively warm. Rough night, I hear. She met his gaze. You heard because you're supposed to have heard, which means someone wanted you to. Keene smiled faintly, folding his hands. Always the strategist. But maybe this was just a coincidence. A few overzealous cops. Happens every day in this country, doesn't it? Angela's jaw tightened. Not to generals on federal assignments. Not unless someone ensures it. Colonel Monroe placed a classified tablet on the table, tapping it open. Sir, internal systems detected a data access anomaly 2 hours before General Price's arrest. Her travel route was copied from the defense logistics schedule by a restricted user with 4-star clearance. The room went still. Angela's eyes narrowed. 4-star? That narrows it down to 6 people in the chain of command. Keen's smile faded, replaced by a calculated calm. You're accusing senior officers of conspiring to have you arrested? That's absurd. Not absurd, she said softly. Efficient. Someone needed to discredit me before next week's oversight hearing. Monroe's expression hardened. Hearing? Angela turned to her. I was scheduled to testify before the Defense Ethics Committee about procurement fraud in Operation Sand Viper. Billions in missing aid funds. I signed the original clearance, and Keen was the overseeing officer. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Keen's face barely moved, but a flicker of panic flashed behind his composure. You're playing a dangerous game, Angela. She took a step closer. So are you. Except you forgot who taught you the rules. Before he could reply, the door opened and a communications officer entered hurriedly, whispering into Monroe's ear. Her expression changed instantly. Sir, the media has the arrest footage. It's already hit the morning networks. Keen turned sharply. What? That's impossible. It was leaked 15 minutes ago from an encrypted server, Monroe said, scrolling through the feed. Has over 3 million views already. The caption reads, Black female general arrested by local police, Pentagon silent. Angela exhaled slowly, not in surprise. In recognition. The leak wasn't just an attack on me. It's an attack on credibility. They wanted this public. They wanted chaos before the hearing. Keen slammed his hand on the table. You think I'd risk my career for that? You've done worse for less, she said. The words hung there, raw and unforgiving. Years of buried resentment cracked open like thunder splitting the air. Keen had once been her mentor, but he'd also been the man who sidelined her projects, took her strategies and claimed them as his own. Now it was clear. He'd wanted her silenced. Monroe's phone buzzed again. She read the message, face pale. Sir, the Justice Department's on the line. They want both your offices sealed until further notice. There's a federal investigation opening at dawn. Keen's confidence cracked. You can't. But before he could finish, Angela's phone lit up on the table. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. General Price, a voice said. Calm, male, distorted slightly. You're getting close to something that's not meant to be found. Angela's eyes darkened. Who is this? The line crackled. You think Keen is the enemy? He's not the only one. There are others, people who profit from shadows. You expose him, they'll bury you both. Think before you testify. The call ended. The room was silent, the air electric. Monroe frowned. Who was that? Angela stared at the black screen. Someone with access. Someone afraid. Keen crossed his arms. And yet you'll never prove any of it. Angela turned toward him slowly, her voice quiet but dangerous. You still don't understand. I don't need to prove it. The system you built will eat itself once I shine light on it. It always does. Thunder cracked outside, rattling the windows. The sound rolled like a warning. A knock came at the door. 2 uniformed guards entered, saluting Monroe. Ma'am, orders from the Justice Department liaison. General Keen is to be taken into temporary custody pending inquiry. Keen's face was drained of color. You can't do this. Actually, Angela said softly. They can. The guards stepped forward. Keen's defiance dissolved into disbelief as the cuffs closed around his wrists. The same sound that had marked Angela's own humiliation just hours earlier. Price, he hissed as they led him away. You think this ends with me? You're naive. You've just started a war you can't win. Angela didn't look away. Then I'll do what I've always done. Win wars men like you start. As the door shut behind him, Monroe let out a breath she'd been holding. Ma'am, that call, should we trace it? Angela's gaze drifted toward the dark screen on the table. No, she said quietly. Let it come to me. Whoever's behind this just made a mistake. They warned me. Outside the Pentagon, the rain had turned to a thin mist. Dawn was breaking through the clouds, gray light spilling across the city like truth creeping through darkness. Angela looked out the window. her reflection faint but resolute. Somewhere deep inside her she could feel the tide shifting again. The setup, the lies, the rot inside the system she had sworn to protect. And for the first time she felt it not as fear, but as fuel. The storm had only been the beginning. The reckoning had just begun. The fallout by dawn, Washington, D.C. was burning, not with fire but with outrage. Every major network had the footage on repeat. 2 white officers slamming handcuffs onto the wrists of a composed black general. Headlines screamed across every screen. Pentagon hero humiliated by local police. News drones hovered outside the station. Talk shows called it the arrest heard around the world. Inside the Pentagon, the air was heavier than smoke. Angela Price sat in a private conference suite. Lights dimmed, screens flashing breaking coverage. The Secretary of Defense had already called twice. Congress wanted statements, and reporters camped outside her home. But none of that noise mattered. What mattered was the name still echoing in her mind. Keene. He'd been taken into custody hours ago, escorted out of the building in full view of his peers. Yet even in handcuffs his warning lingered. You've started a war you can't win. Colonel Monroe entered quietly, a tablet in her hand, face drawn from exhaustion. "Ma'am," she said, "the Justice Department confirmed Keene's network extends further than expected. Multiple defense contracts were funneled through shell companies overseas. The fraud trail runs deep, billions siphoned from aid budgets." Angela leaned forward, eyes sharp. "And the leak about my route?" "We found it," Monroe said, sliding the tablet over. "It came from a classified communications relay registered to an internal cybersecurity contractor, Project Blackridge." Angela frowned. "Blackridge? That's not defense. That's private intelligence." Monroe nodded grimly. "They've been under quiet investigation for data manipulation, foreign kickbacks, and..." She hesitated. "Possible involvement in whistleblower suppression. They might have wanted you neutralized before your testimony." Angela sat back, mind racing. The pieces were falling into place too perfectly. Keene was just the front man. The real architects hid in plain sight, protected by corporate camouflage and national security smoke. "Get me the Director of Defense Oversight," Angela said. "We take this straight to the committee." "Ma'am," Monroe said carefully, "there's something else." Keene's files contained private correspondences, emails between him and someone using the alias Falcon 7. The tone was threatening. "Show me." The screen flickered. Lines of text appeared, short, chilling, surgical. "Ensure Price is neutralized before the hearing. Discredit her credibility. A local incident will suffice. She won't reach the stand." Angela's pulse slowed to that dangerous calm she'd learned in war. They planned it. Every second of it. Monroe swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." For a long moment, Angela said nothing. She just looked out the window where the Capitol dome gleamed through the thinning fog. She thought of her husband, gone too soon. Of the soldiers who'd died believing in systems cleaner than reality. Of the young rookie officer who had looked at her with fear and respect in equal measure. The same system that had trusted her to lead now needed her to expose it. Monroe's voice broke the silence. "General, your statement to the media is scheduled in 20 minutes. But the White House liaison recommends keeping it neutral. They don't want escalation." Angela turned sharply. "Neutral? After everything?" Her voice trembled, not with weakness but the kind of fury that carried truth. "They humiliated me in public. They tried to destroy me and now they want me silent to protect optics? No, I won't play politics with pain." She stood, straightened her blazer, and faced Monroe. "I'll make my statement, but I'll say it my way." Minutes later, cameras flashed across the Pentagon briefing room. The world was watching. The hum of live feeds, the rustle of reporters, the sharp scent of adrenaline. Angela stepped up to the podium, every move deliberate. She didn't need notes. Her words were carved in fire. "I've served this country for 30 years, she began, her voice calm but resonant. "I've led men and women into war zones, into chaos, into places where right and wrong blurred under fire. I've buried friends and saluted the flag knowing it stood for justice. But justice means nothing if it depends on who's wearing the uniform, or the color of the skin beneath it." Reporters leaned forward. The room went utterly still. "I was not attacked by foreign enemies," she continued. "I was handcuffed by the very system I swore to defend." But make no mistake, this is bigger than me. This is about every person who has ever been silenced, profiled, or humiliated because of ignorance wrapped in authority. You cannot arrest dignity. You cannot handcuff the truth. The silence that followed was electric. Then flashes erupted, reporters shouting questions. Monroe stood off stage, eyes glistening. But her tablet vibrated suddenly. She glanced down and froze. An encrypted message blinked across the screen. Stop her, now. She doesn't understand what's coming. Before she could react, the side doors burst open. 2 agents from internal security stormed in, speaking rapidly into radios. One approached Monroe. "Colonel, we have a credible threat. Someone's breached defense servers. Classified intel tied to Sand Viper is leaking to the press." Angela paused mid-sentence as whispers spread across the room. "What's happening?" she asked. "Ma'am," Monroe said urgently, approaching the podium. "Someone just dumped everything. Contracts, correspondence, your arrest footage, Keen's files. It's all online, worldwide." Gasps rippled through the reporters. Screens around the room flickered to breaking updates. "Pentagon leak exposes massive defense fraud." Angela's heart pounded. "Who did it?" Monroe's voice was barely a whisper. "We don't know, but the tag on the file, it's signed Falcon 7. The name hit like a bullet. The same ghost who had orchestrated her setup had just turned on everyone, including Keen." Angela stared at the flashing screens, the truth now uncontrollable. "Then the game just changed," she said softly. "And whoever Falcon 7 is, they just lit the fuse." Monroe looked at her. "Ma'am, what do we do?" Angela's eyes hardened, her voice calm as steel. "We found them, before they turned the truth into another weapon." Outside, the storm clouds were breaking, sunlight pushing through, but the city below was already trembling. The reckoning had gone public. The war Keen promised had arrived, and it wasn't fought on foreign soil anymore. It had come home. Morning light crept over Washington like a slow confession. By the time General Angela Price returned to her office, the world had changed. The leak had detonated through every media channel, toppling careers and shattering silence. Overnight, the Pentagon transformed from fortress to storm center. Keen's network collapsed under federal raids. Senators called emergency hearings, and in the middle of it all stood Angela, unbreakable, calm, and utterly changed. But the war wasn't over. Colonel Monroe entered quietly, her eyes shadowed from sleeplessness. "Ma'am," she said softly, "we traced the Falcon 7 leak." Angela looked up from her desk, where the morning's papers lay scattered. "Tell me." Monroe hesitated, as if weighing mercy against truth. "It came from inside the Pentagon's ethics division." Angela frowned. "Our own investigators?" "Yes, but there's more." Monroe placed a folder on the desk, her voice low. "The source code used to bypass encryption. It matches the defense cybersecurity protocols, written under your authorization 5 years ago." Angela went still. "That's impossible." Monroe opened the folder, revealing a single photograph. A man, smiling in uniform, standing beside Angela at a humanitarian ceremony. Her late husband, Colonel Daniel Price. Her breath caught. "We found the encryption key tied to his old access credentials," Monroe continued. "But he died in 2019. The only way someone could have used this is if he left a back door, one even you didn't know about." Angela leaned back, staring at the photo. Daniel's face, that same steady smile, seemed to look straight through her, calm, knowing, protective even from beyond the grave. "He used to handle data security for Sand Viper's early operations," she murmured. "He told me once that if corruption ever went high enough, truth needed a way to survive." Monroe nodded quietly. "Then, ma'am, Falcon 7 might have been him." The words hung heavy, soft as prayer, devastating as revelation. Angela felt the room tilt slightly, her heartbeat loud in her ears. "He must have left something behind," she said. "Something that would activate if that project ever resurfaced." "Exactly," Monroe said. "The leak came from a dormant failsafe he coded into the defense servers. Once Keen's network tried to erase your credentials after your arrest, it triggered the release. Your husband's ghost finished what you started." Angela closed her eyes. For a moment, the walls dissolved into memory. Daniel at his desk, late nights coding, saying softly, "If anything ever happens to you, I'll make sure they can never bury your truth. She'd smiled then, thinking he meant it as comfort. Now she realized he meant it as a plan. Monroe's voice broke the silence. The Justice Department will clear your name today. The President has ordered a full investigation into the misconduct. You'll be honored publicly next week. They want you to rebuild the Ethics Division. Angela didn't answer immediately. Her hands rested on the photo, fingertips tracing the edges. Do they still want me? She asked finally. Because they believe in justice? Or because they need a symbol to quiet the outrage? Monroe hesitated. Maybe both. Angela smiled faintly. Then I'll give them both, but on my terms. She stood and walked to the window. The sun had broken through the gray, spilling gold across the Potomac. The city still buzzed with tension, but she could feel something deeper stirring. A shift not in politics, but in conscience. Prepare the press room, she said. I'll make one final statement. The cameras rolled once more, but this time the tone was different. No outrage, no anger, only stillness. Angela stepped to the podium, her voice clear and solemn. 5 years ago, my husband died believing our nation could be better. Last night, his code, his faith, proved him right. He exposed not just corruption but complacency, and that's the real sickness in power. Not evil, but indifference. She paused, letting the words breathe. I've spent my life in uniforms. But I've learned something no uniform can teach. Real strength isn't about rank or medals or fear. It's about the courage to look your country in the eye and tell it the truth even when it hurts. The room was silent. Cameras blinked. Even the reporters who had come for scandal listened like they were hearing scripture. Those who handcuffed me, she continued softly, have lost their badges. But I forgive them. Because forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. It frees me from the weight of their ignorance, and it frees them from the illusion that cruelty has power. A tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. My husband's ghost gave this nation one last gift, truth without permission. I intend to honor that by leading reform, not revenge, because what we need now isn't punishment. It's awakening. Her voice trembled slightly as she finished. Justice without compassion is vengeance, and vengeance, no matter how righteous, only makes new ghosts. She stepped back from the podium. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the room rose. Every reporter, every soldier, every staffer standing in silent applause. Monroe watched from the side, tears glinting in her eyes. She saw something shift in Angela's face, pain giving way to peace. As Angela walked out of the press room, the sky outside opened into light. The storm was gone. The air smelled like rain and renewal. She looked up, eyes soft but resolute. Thank you, Daniel, she whispered. You didn't just save me. You saved what I still believed in. And for the first time in years, she felt the war inside her end. The uniform on her shoulders no longer felt like armor. It felt like purpose. The city pulsed below, restless but reborn, and General Angela Price walked into the morning sun carrying no anger, no fear, only truth. Final message of the story. In a world where power often hides behind titles and fear disguises itself as order, truth remains the only force that doesn't need permission to exist. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is reclaiming control from those who tried to break you. And sometimes the greatest revolution isn't loud or bloody. It's the quiet moment when one soul chooses integrity over silence.